let's go. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Autism 360 podcast, the 360 Method, a weekly podcast where we talk about everything on the Autism 360 program. Each week, we'll be catching you up with what's going on in the program, chatting with team members, and talking about all things mindset, as well as exploring relevant ideas that autism parents think about. This week, I'm so lucky and excited to be chatting with Michele. Michele is one of our senior speech therapists here at the program and has been with the company for nearly 2 years. Michele herself was diagnosed with ADHD in her 20s and is going to share her journey of understanding herself and what her diagnosis means about how she can be her best self. Welcome, Michele. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, that is my pleasure. I'm so excited to hear about your story. I'm Ella. I'm an Autism 360 veteran coach and explorer of all things parenting support. And welcome to you, our lovely listeners. We care about you. We care about your thoughts and experiences. And so whether you're a program member or not, we would love to hear from you. So please, whatever your thoughts, if you've got feedback or questions, drop us a line at hello@autism360.com. So before we get started, I would love to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land I live and work, and from where this podcast is being broadcast today. And also to say specifically for today's session that this is not a substitute for medical advice. If you have concerns about yourself, concerns about your child, please do seek medical attention. So, Michele, I'm so excited to hear about your journey today. I thought we would get started by chatting a little bit about your early life. What was your experience of childhood like, looking back now that we know that you had undiagnosed ADHD?
Sure. So I think the most significant thing that I remember was just a lot of overwhelming anxiety and just not understanding what was happening around me. Not very fussy eating that started when I was about a toddler, just very, very hyperactive. My mom would say that neighbors would call and I was in the neighborhood without her knowing, like pushing the pram, getting into things that I shouldn't be, drinking toxic things just on the go. Yeah. I would say strong imagination, lots of nightmares, rocking my head to sleep because I couldn't sleep. Lots of those types of sleep issues. And when I was very little, the nursery school, as I used to call it, told my parents, let's face it, Linda, your daughter isn't very bright. She's not conforming.
Wow.
And I do have memories of being there and being very overwhelmed by the kids all like rushing to sit in this squiggly table, and they all wanted to. Ooh, it just gives me chills thinking of it.
Yeah, that sounds really overwhelming.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for understanding. Absolutely. And just different interests that were like obsessions with like anything like dangly, like keys. So my grandfather was a bus mechanic and I got all these keys. Obsession. Like I used to love shoes and I would look at them and I wouldn't walk straight. Like I'd always look at the shoes constantly. And even like the noise of cars going by when I was little in the backseat of the car, constantly trying to hear it and replaying it repetitively, like in play, and just making the sound in the car. I know it's strange. I just look back and remember things like that. Like,
Amazing. Okay. And you mentioned just before we got started that you did eventually get a diagnosis, but that wasn't until your 20s. So what led you there? What got you to that point?
What led me to that point was the lack of not being able to hold a job. Because of disorganization or not being organized, really starting tasks and not completing them. So employers would say, you're starting things, but you're running around, you're not completing anything. I probably interrupted others a little bit too much. I was still at that point on the hyperactive end, which does go away as you mature. It does drop down.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would say definitely it was just not unemployment, but just the difficulty holding jobs. Also, uh, becoming very bored
Mm.
and not being able to hold a job as well because of getting bored
Mhm.
and not finding certain, I was looking in the wrong direction, so I wasn't finding
Mhm.
things engaging
Yes.
as well. Yes,
Okay. Interesting. And
yes.
so, did you start to look around to find answers to why you were struggling in this way? Did somebody suggest trying to find a diagnosis? How did that come about?
Yeah, well, one major thing in my life was what they call, like, today, I don't think it's formally recognized in the DMS-5, I believe, but it's called rejection sensitive
Ah,
dysphoria. So
cool.
that was another thing my whole life as a child, was feeling hypersensitive to even things that I perceived would be maybe something like someone, maybe I thought they were talking about me, or constructive criticism. It didn't matter,
Mhm.
or if I was told off, just extreme pain. And I think that caused problems on jobs
Mhm.
with relationships as well. So I think what happened was I couldn't take being in the wrong job anymore
Mm.
and feeling like I was just dying inside because I wasn't living my life the way, I unstimulated. And so I started researching and realized that I wanted to do something in the, maybe guidance counselor, so,
Mm.
social, in the social field, social worker, or,
Yeah.
and then and I met with a friend anyway, happened upon, he mentioned speech pathologist, and I loved studying languages, and hence
Ah.
researched that. And thank goodness, 6 years later, after graduating with a bachelor's, not go, all these different jobs, I
Mm.
finally found my niche and haven't looked back.
Yes. Amazing. Okay. I mean, it that must have been a challenge in and of itself. Speech pathology is not a walk in the park. It's
No,
a
it's
difficult
not.
degree. Yeah.
It's not, Ella. And what happened was trying to get into, like, like, I had to do a couple of bachelors to get into the master's. In
Yeah.
order to do that, you have to do standardized testing, which
Oh,
I
tricky.
struggle with. And also, I should have said in childhood, definitely learning disability in math, like what they call dyscalculia,
Mhm.
suspected auditory processing, because I struggled to understand, and especially noisy environments. And my son was then diagnosed with that anyway, an
Yeah.
ADD. So all those things impact. And so I wanted to get some special length of time, like added extra time
Mm.
for these testing.
Mhm.
And so at that time, the professionals that tested me, I already had my diagnosis from a nice, understanding psychologist,
Mhm.
but the school wanted to use the university, their team of psychologists, and
Okay.
all that. And at that time, they just looked at me basically and said, well, you're functioning where you're at, because they look at intelligence tests
Mhm. Yeah.
and don't take into account short-term memory issues and
Mhm.
all those things. And also, I had a test that day, I had to study. So
Mm.
anyway, I didn't qualify because they basically said you're functioning where you're at. But there was such a discrepancy if they looked at my skill set. They
Mhm.
call it like scattered skills.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't granted that,
Mm.
but I found other ways. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Okay. And yes, kind of starting out as a speech pathologist and, starting your professional career, having this knowledge about yourself and having this knowledge about the way that your brain thrives, what have been some of the most important, I guess, cognitive strategies or strategies more broadly that you find really helpful to support yourself trying to get things done?
Absolutely. In my 20s, I briefly had medication, but
Mm.
back then I think they didn't really understand the levels. And so I did love the way it helped me concentrate and look at the world. It slowed down time unbelievably. I couldn't believe the way I was living
Mhm.
and the noise in the brain, and how
Yeah.
But back in those times, the medication was limited and so there was awful side effects when it wears off called rebound effect.
Yeah.
So I managed to compensate. I think years of compensating got me through with my, getting the speech pathology master science degree. And I think that I loved it. I was able to focus, having supported home helped. And I think just starting to learn the reward of, wow, if I start this sooner, like I will, I will finish it. And that felt good to get things in. So that was a learning curve, like learning all that. But the problem is that you can compensate so much, but then there could be comorbidity, like with ADHD. So there could be like anxiety, depression. So sometimes things could get too much. And, sometimes you can psych yourself up and snap out of it, like I was able to at that time. But later on in perimenopause, I found out ADHD women will most likely, low estrogen, will experience increased symptoms.
Wow.
Yeah. So even though I was able to cope back then at some level, it was because my life was very structured. I was very motivated. Writing things down, having support.
Amazing.
But yeah, it's still, there's always that things
struggle.
Yes.
Yeah.
That you can unravel or things can fall apart. It's very exhausting, at times, because you're always trying to keep, like they say, regulate throughout the day. So there's a lot of emotional regulation. There can be irritability, restlessness, masking because you're trying to hide, especially with women. They might feel and they become people pleasers because we learned that because we don't want to feel the pain from that condition of that pain is so deep from any slight remark, and so you just become, compensate a lot, mask a lot, and sometimes it can become overwhelming. So I suggest parents, if people are feeling overwhelmed, that they get professional help with the right professional that understands ADHD and the fact that there can be other conditions happening with it.
I had a couple of friends that I went through uni with in our undergrad who I would have described at the time as scattered. I would have described them as disorganized, scattered, difficult, struggling with time management, that sort of thing. The kind of friend that you tell.
Yes.
You tell them that actually the event starts half an hour earlier than it really starts so that you can get them there on time, that kind of thing. And it's funny because so one of them finished her medical degree and then the other one finished her engineering degree. They both came to recognize their ADHD symptoms and both of them went and got diagnosed. And I have just found there are a huge amount of women, high achieving, yourself, speech pathologist, high achieving, hugely successful women who are going through life, managing these symptoms, not recognizing or maybe increasingly recognizing, I think, increasingly, lately, that actually what they're dealing with is something really quite significant. It's a cognitive disorder. What are you
Absolutely. So the executive function skills can be really and emotional dysregulation are two of the biggest things that can really impact a lot. And sometimes what happens is it just, yes, we compensate and we can get some things in order. but we're very fragile. Like it can fall apart easily.
Yeah.
And it's good to get the right help. So apps are great, but sometimes even with apps, we forget and we put it in our brain and then it's still the wrong time.
Yeah.
And I think that high achievers, sometimes with ADHD, if they that inner drive is from trying to prove yourself and go overboard because you're overcompensating now, you know, and because maybe you're also very passionate as well. And so sometimes if it's all too much, it's good to look at options. And for me, eventually it all became too much. Like I couldn't, things weren't working anymore because of maybe this, you know, low estrogen, or maybe like your friends, it might just where I had to, you know, investigate and go back and look at some medications.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I hope I'm following on what you were saying about your. Yes.
Absolutely.
And that cognitive is definitely, a big.
Totally. Well, and it's something that I've noticed with, I mean, parents of our clients more broadly, but a couple of mums that I've worked with specifically, you know, once they've worked with us, they do coaching to understand their child better. They understand, you know, what their ADHD diagnosis means for their child, or their autism means for their child. And that growth of knowledge and understanding about their child helps them to reflect about their own experience. And so I've had a couple of, I guess, in, you know, specifically in these examples, mums then go seek their own diagnosis to see if that's something that can help them understand themselves. Have you had this experience? Is this something you see as well?
Definitely. I've had parents, they start, like a mother, start to suspect a bit. And then if once I have a good relationship, I feel more comfortable, I can share, you know, I find out, you know, how more about them and how it's impacting. And then if they might already suspect, if they don't, you know, I might remind them about family history and just discuss what they might be feeling and how I can understand that it runs in my family, and how how it may look and how it presents in women as well, and how there is help, and you can go, as long as you find the right professional, because some psychiatrists, unfortunately, if they don't understand, or, you know, they just maybe didn't study that as much or understand, they might just look at it as a busy mom, or menopause or perimenopause, or just anxiety and depression. But they have to find someone that tweaks everything, because there's so much happening that can be happening. So yes, I definitely, a mother that I did, that I remember specifically, yes, she was able to get on her journey and begin that healing process. And yeah. So yes, I'm always trying to, you know,
well, I think there is something awesome, something extra, something about real life lived experience of neurodivergence that is so valuable to our clients. And, you know, you're on your own journey of self-acceptance and self-understanding, but what do you think helps you, you know, about your own experience of neurodivergence to connect with families in your job here?
I guess definitely if I find that if parents are very sensitive, like if they're very sensitive, also inattention can be a huge thing. So for instance, I guess they call me like a mixed type. The inattention can be, so like if they're not, if they're feeling overwhelmed, if they're having that inattention, that high sensitivity, feeling very chaotic, feeling a lot of anxiety, brain talk, definitely those can be those signs where I'm so sorry, Ella. You did ask the question and I went off, and I, of course, now I sort of forgot.
That is great. And you know
what you asked a question about how it relates to the parent, like how, and I wanted to make that connection, and and I was trying to get to the point. So with our,
I love it.
Yeah, there I go. Yeah. So I definitely explained to them that I understand that.
Yes.
Like I might say that I see that you might be feeling this. I see that you might be, and I can empathize with that because, you know, and I might mention about my son and his journey. And then I might mention a little bit about me, and in a way that's professional, that can help them without getting like too, you know, too personal, because it's about them. And and what I find is that they feel better. They, yes, Michelle, they'll start to, and then that coaching is very rewarding because they can, through understanding themselves better, they understand their child better. And I guess for me, you could say my obsession has been to understand more about not just me, but about the human brain and neurodiversity.
Totally.
And I'm still learning all the time about brain differences, because like sensory processing, like how that might look in ADHD versus, like they can have it too, versus autism, and how there's studies in the brain that show different parts of the brain. There's so much, like sugar cravings, glucose uptake to the brain can be slow. There's been studies, because I have huge sugar cravings, but they're beyond what's the normal. And that brain is starving because that glucose uptake is slow. Fussy eating is another big one, Ella, where I can try to support parents, like in terms of trying to let them know how it feels for the child from my own
experience.
Amazing. I mean, I didn't put green things in my like salad, like, oh, I just used to watch people in fascination eat it because I wanted to, and the gagging, I couldn't, it wasn't until I was about in my late 40s that I started to be able to eat it, but it's got to be a certain way.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah,
and so,
amazing.
And I don't like lots of things in my food, like say, like an oatmeal. My husband, you know, some people love to put lots of, and I know neurotypicals can feel this way too. I do get that, but for us, it's like it's, you know what I'm trying to say? It's that history and that level of, and I can't deal with all that. The busyness.
Totally. Well, often, and you know, as you know, my background is psychology, so I'm very familiar with the DSM and kind of diagnostic criteria and all those things. And one of the things that the DSM is really clear about pointing out is not that that lots of people don't experience these symptoms. It's not that lots of people don't, you know, experience fussy eating, or lots of people don't experience anxiety. But the point that the DSM makes is that these symptoms are to a level or to an intensity that impacts functioning.
Absolutely. Like inattention, you know, like absolutely. You go away with the fairies, you miss chunks of time. Yes. I didn't know that. Like I had to actually go on medication to learn that. And then, you know, and then be able to train to try to catch that, you know, like say if the medication hasn't kicked in yet, unorganized thinking, trying to organize thoughts, how fight flight makes the person lose their higher cognitive, they can't express themselves properly. So there's so much going on with it. I hope that's making sense with
absolutely makes sense
with what you're saying. With the yes, it's just to that it does impact the life. And so like I try to explain that to parents if they're feeling that, or if they want to understand more about why their child might be having certain experiences. Definitely with that neurodivergent brain.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
things have changed a lot since you were experiencing those things in childhood, even since your diagnosis and those sorts of things. What are some of the positive changes you have seen in the industry, in treatment, in, public opinion, in your time working as a speechie?
Um, I think more and more people are coming forward in the neurodiverse or I try to memorize,
I know, I get it wrong all the time.
in the community. More and more people are coming out and talking about it, and having podcasts and discussing about, hey, like, I'm a autistic ADHD, speech pathologist. And
Amazing.
so that's been really nice to see, like, people being able to you know speak up and embrace. Definitely Facebook. Sometimes I can recommend good books or podcasts or Facebook pages to parents, so that's out there, which is definitely getting better. I think the research is definitely saying that the more studies need to be done, not just on young boys with ADHD, but like on women. And it can look, there's differences. And like with autism too, like boys, girls, and even for certain types, like my boy didn't present like me, who was more obvious. I had to fight for them to recognize. And then because he was more of an inattentive presentation, that was stronger. Yeah.
Yes.
So I would say that today, the more these things happen, the more people talk about it. I think hopefully, like with jobs, I think, like I said before, I think we talked about, there's definitely, I can say, improving in our world. You could say the social model is, but I do feel that there's a long way to go still. I think maybe those more traditional fields. Yes. And I think the more you know yourself, you've done your homework, your research, I think the more you can advocate for yourself in a professional, kind way to maybe those professionals that just might not understand that yet. They're not doing it always on purpose. They just might not understand and need to do more of their own.
Yes.
And the ADHD brain gets so hyper focused. We don't shift attention well, like, I want dinner and I can't get up, can't shift. And we research so much that sometimes, like, not that you're a know-it-all, but you might know sometimes more, like in an area, because you
have really hyper focused on something, and you genuinely are you're an expert now because you spent 9 hours straight doing research on
it can
whatever
be,
it might be.
Yes, and it's a gift because we like taking pieces, and we don't like to finish until we have a full
picture.
And so I think the more we advocate, I guess, and that's the thing, it's very hard. I think it's certain jobs or places, there's a long history, I can only speak for myself, of hiding, compensating, masking. And with the hypersensitivity, you're so afraid, like, if I do this, if I say this, I'm going to get fired. So I think that it's a long way to go, because both people have to step up and learn about themselves, and the other side learning too, and both sides respecting and embracing, and not using the diagnosis as an excuse ever.
No.
But you know what I'm saying? But to let people know, because we do get, but I don't always pay attention. You do get that. And sometimes they might mean it like they're trying, like I had a friend recently say it, and they might just be trying to make you feel better.
Yes.
But it's not the right thing to say. And I know this with the autistic individuals community, they have their reasons for feeling that too. Like,
absolutely.
And I know in my, in the ADHD, it's very, like, when that is said, it's you can just that the RSD again, that but my friend, I think she was just trying maybe to make me feel better, like,
Yeah. Or less
um,
alone in your
so,
experience, maybe.
yeah, so I just paused, and then she realized and said, oh, no, it would be much worse for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I hope that makes sense, Ella. I
Absolutely.
always have to say that in the end, I do have to question. I'm so sorry. It's because I want to make
You know
sure I've
what?
come out organized to you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think being open about the way that your brain is working, about the way that you're thinking, is part of unmasking. It really is. And it's okay. You
Thank
know,
you.
and I want to finish up by getting a couple of recommendations from you. If parents are querying their own neurotype, if they're looking at their child and recognizing some of the things that you're mentioning about, where are some great places, maybe a book and a podcast that you really like, that parents can go to even just to hear about the experience of somebody with ADHD?
Yes, I'm trying to think of like offhand a name, but I can definitely, I'll just say what it always, it's when I need to pull, I get nervous and it doesn't come when I don't know right away. Oh, who should I recommend? But definitely Sue Larkey is a great place to start in terms of the child. Like you can definitely learn about yourself too, but definitely with the child, I'll start with her because children spend a lot of time at school.
Yes.
And she has wonderful books, and she works with people, both. She works with people neurotypical, people who are neurodivergent, in a neurodiverse group, should I say? And
Yeah.
she recognized, and so she's great because she has some really good resources that are very practical,
Right.
very child parent friendly.
Okay.
Podcasts, I'll be honest with you, I do so much, I need to think because
Mm.
parents,
No,
I
that's well. I
I
know that
tend
you
to
love
do I tend to do research,
Yeah.
so much research.
Yeah.
Usually with parents, I might start with a Facebook. There are podcasts out there. I know they are.
Mm.
I definitely do mention Facebook groups
Okay.
that and I even mention if they're with Autism 360, but if they're looking specifically, they're honing, I could recommend a few.
Great.
um did you want me to say specifically today,
Yeah.
Ella? I'm
Well,
not.
what we might do is I'll get a couple of your favorites and I'll pop them in the show
That
notes.
would be great because I know that, yes,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, I know that Sue Larkey has a podcast as well. So your Sue Larkey recommendation covers it all. It just, it's got a bit of everything. Thank you for coming and chatting today, Michele.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's genuinely a pleasure. And I think, if this has brought up any questions for parents, or it's, either about themselves or about their children, I would really recommend, if you're with the Autism 360 podcast, reach out to your coach and ask if they can put you in touch with Michele, or, you can always email hello@autism360.com to ask a question, because I think you're such a wealth of knowledge about this topic. And I think that anybody would do well to kind of pick your brain about that sort of thing. So thank you
Thank you,
for
Ella.
coming. And we will be back next week talking about another interesting topic that autism parents think about. So once again, thank you to our lovely listeners. And until next week, think 360.